So I think Chinese government is really visionary in that sense in trying to cover the future trends and in protecting its investors. I think it's a win-win situation because it also encourages foreign investment coming into China by having a more liberal definition of investment and investment protection. So I think Chinese government is doing quite well in that regard.
Thank you, Dr. Li. From our discussion, it sounds like China is making a lot of improvement in terms of capital market structures or government policies, but we also mentioned there's a long way to go. So lastly, I want to ask a question for our senior students who are graduating, looking for a job. What are some potential occupations that really need this kind of talent for students who speak English and Chinese well and who both understand cultures, both Chinese cultures and American cultures?
Well, we've placed a number of our graduating seniors from the business school lately in the Big Four audit firms. And the Big Four audit firms, I personally would not be suited by being an auditor, but these Big Four audit firms also do things like forensic accounting. So we have a graduate from 2 years ago who's doing forensic accounting for Pricewaterhouse in Beijing. And what she's doing is actually trying to trace through ownership chains and bring more transparency to the business environment. I think also the capital market, as the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges try to work with the SEC and the New York Stock Exchange to further integrate themselves into global capital markets, probably an understanding of how U.S. capital markets work and how U.S. rule of law works and finance, those are really important things. And our students come out with a really strong grasp of capital markets and finance, so that probably would be an opportunity.
Along with the trends that I mentioned in terms of the outward investment opportunities, I think that's another growth area that many of you can contribute. You have this international background, perspective, and so you can help the domestic firms in China to open its international operations. And so I think this kind of cross-cultural backgrounds for students who graduate out of the prestigious universities such as Emory can contribute in that regards. Broadly speaking, it's internationalization of China, and it's the internationalization in terms of how to bring everything up to the current and modern standard of the international system. And I think that's what you're here for. You learn from the best and trying to learn the most current. And that's what you can contribute to China in its future.
In fact, this is a very intriguing question. I remember about 3 years ago, in early 2009, when I returned to Shanghai, I had an interview with the NPR Marketplace. They asked a similar question: why you want to come back to China, and what the challenge you are facing here? Basically, I want to see this overall big picture for me is that I think the China development and economic growth should be a really good opportunities and new opportunities for each of you if you want to explore your career in the eastern side. Let me quote another person's said about this. There are a person called David Lee, the CEO of the pretty good bank in Hong Kong, the Bank of East Asia, Dongya Yinhang. This is basically one of the number 3 largest bank in Hong Kong, and this is the first bank established by Chinese in 1918 in British colony. Very successful bank. The CEO, David Lee, is already 71 years old. In year 2010, when he had an interview with a magazine called Institutional Investor. I don't know, maybe many of you know this is a US big magazine, Institutional Investor. He said, if I were a young man, today I will go to Shanghai to be a fund manager and stay there for my whole career. I thought a lot about what he said, based on my experience. Probably he exaggerated his feeling, but overall, I would say it's kind of a reasonable good experience. Think about some very successful young guys over the past decade, in China. Many of them, just came from US. They got education in US and they came back to Shanghai, started their business, very successful. One firm, that Baidu, that's called Chinese Google, that CEO also very, very successful. A lot of that examples. Okay, my point is overall probably it's another good option for you to think about. But today, after China has opened the door for 20 years, it's not so easy for each of you to think, oh, pretty easy to get successful. Even, Emory, the well-known, very famous university, you guys have a great experience because the time changed. Because there are a lot of smart people already went back. Also, the local schools, we have also some pretty smart people. So the expectation should not be extremely high. Not like 10 years ago we went back, we'll give you a very important role that you do. It's a little bit different. One example, just maybe personal experience. When I worked with the Shanghai Stock Exchange, our research division, we have 19 employees. Majority of them got a kind of PhD, MBA from Harvard, Cambridge, Princeton. So do they have a lot of opportunities? It's hard to say. Okay, the expectation is to be realistic. But overall, it's definitely very good. Second is the life environment is getting much, much better than before. Even you are Americans, if you want to eat the baking donuts for breakfast, you can do it. If you want to eat a pizza for lunch, you can do it. In fact, pizza, McDonald's, and KFC, they have together have more than 5,000 restaurants in China. Account for KFC, Pizza Hut, they count more than 50% of the global revenue from China today. So they're really big. Even for GM, they produced more than 2 million cars in China. The largest market for GM, not here in the US, in China. So basically, I want to say that lifestyle, if you want to keep American lifestyle, probably you can do the same thing in Shanghai. But something probably you need to think about the cultural difference, like Dr. Panel said. There's still a lot of cultural difference. Let's say in Shanghai, if you work with a mutual fund firm, probably your income will largely similar here, but you need to work in the night, long time, or during the weekend. It's harder for me to work the weekend sometimes, but it's very normal. Also, a lot of the issues, the cultural issues, you need also to prepare. Okay, basically my point is, okay, it's another good place for you to think about it. At least give you another opportunity that you think. But the second is your target, your goal should be realistic. It'll be helpful if you prepare for that.
Thank you for all the insights and information. And now we have 15 minutes left, and I want to pass the opportunity to the audience who have questions for panelists.
Hi, I have two questions. One is you mentioned domestic Chinese companies looking to establish international operations, and directing this at Professor Lee, are there such companies looking to relocate or expand into Atlanta? And secondly, what is the effect of the one-child policy on business in China?
Okay. I'm not sure specifically in Atlanta, but one interesting website you can go to is the Heritage Foundation has a track. They have tracked our Chinese foreign investments specifically mentioning the mergers and acquisitions that took place in the past couple of years. And so you can see a pattern there. Most likely, in addition to what I talked about earlier, resources and energy will be one. Another is the opportunity to create their own brands or to use the existing brand to shorten the research and development for them. So if Atlanta poses these opportunities for them, it's actually a good thing to maybe not waiting for them to come over to Atlanta. Is actually to go over and present these opportunities to them. And China continued to have a lot of savings rates and a lot of savings or capital surplus. So I think they haven't reached the limits yet. Another thing is, think about this, the return they receive from investing in US bonds is minimal. So they are looking for opportunities, alternative investment opportunities. And so in that regard, I think the city of Atlanta can do much more to promote itself in that sense. I'm not sure about the one-child policy. I'll defer to my colleague.
I'm probably the last person who should be speaking about an internal Chinese policy, but I would make two observations. One is that Chinese parents seem able to concentrate their resources and lavish them on a single child better than they would be able to if they had 4 children. So for at least some Chinese students in the United States, the one-child policy worked out to be a pretty good thing. But the caveat, the caution that I would sound is that there appear to be about 1 million missing Chinese girl babies. And that's going to lead to some social unrest at some point in the future. So that's probably one of the challenges that China has to address. And pardon me if I should not have made that observation.
Just to go back, in terms of one-child policy, I do see that down the road, we see the population aging as a problem. Not just for China too, but also across East Asia, from Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, it's the same. The population, aging of the population, and how you will support the workforce down the road to maintain the growth rate. So that is not unique to China, but certainly is also a byproduct in China as a result of this one-child policy as well.
The 2 professors already said it very well. I just add 2 major points. Number one is for the investment of China to US and other countries. For here, I would say over the past 30 years, Chinese government are probably need to focus on to attract more capitals from overseas into China. But today the situation largely changed a lot. The reason because China today has a lot of capitals, high saving rate. Look at today the China foreign exchange reserve, 3.3 trillion. That's 35% of global foreign exchange reserve. So where they have to invest those money, just for the 3.3 trillion. Where to do that? Today, they already invested more than 1 trillion to US Treasury. Is that the best option? Probably they don't think either like us. But do they have other choice? That's the question. No. When I gave a presentation to CSRC, that the Chinese SEC last summer, they asked a similar question. Basically, they don't want to invest too much into, let's say, the developed country, treasuries, but they do not have any opportunity. If they do not invest into US dollar, can they invest into euro? Of course, no. Can they invest into Japanese yen? The market is so small. So basically, they have no choice. So today, I think that overall, a policy direction probably want to change from the security investment, totally said, to kind of a corporate investment with the commodities, either actual physical commodity or the commodity, based firms at major direction, because they definitely have that kind of demand. Do they need to pick our Atlanta as a major origin? Definitely, Atlanta is one of the most well-known cities in the whole country, in whole China. We already saw some well-known firms that came here. Like there are a firm called Sanyi Machinery. This is the best machinery, earth machinery manufacturer in China. Basically, definitely their product can compete with Caterpillar. They already invested into a manufacturer here in Georgia. Yeah, basically, yes. I want to say also another example, just Savannah. Savannah is the number four largest seaport in US. But 50% of their business just trading within China. So already we have a strong connection between Georgia with China. For the one-child policy, probably I cannot comment too much, but one observation is this, like Dr. Panel said. They are pretty successful for this policy, but definitely create some side effect. One side effect is the imbalance between the young men and the young ladies. I saw some number today, this kind of ratio 108. If this number correct, will cause a lot of problem, social problem in the future. Also, because this one-child policy, right now there are great concerns. I think China will lack a lot of labor 20, 30 years ago. That will make China become old first before they get rich. We don't know exactly very well. Definitely, I think from long run labor supply standpoint, I think probably a very challenging topic for China and the Chinese government.
Okay. I hope that answered your question. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, now I'll ask a question. In terms of Chinese currency, some people believe that in the future, Chinese renminbi will replace the US dollar and become the dominant currency in the world. Where do you see Chinese currency in the next 5 or 10 years? And what are some barriers for Chinese US development? Thank you.
I get to make the first cheap, easy response to that, which is that given how much of the Chinese government's reserves are invested in US dollars, I imagine that the Chinese government would hate to see the dollar cease to be a reserve currency, because that would make their reserves worth much less than they are otherwise. So sometimes I think that the scaremongering around the demise of the US dollar is probably overstated because of the Chinese government's incentive to keep the currency strong.
I'm of this agreement. I think I agree with what Dr. Panel was saying. Just imagine 10, 15 years ago when we first had the euro, and the world was talking about how the euro is going to replace US dollars down the road. And it turns out it's not happening. And I think Chinese yuan has potential, but it will not be able to replace US dollars anytime soon. That's my bet.
I totally agree with two professors. Yes, and if you ask the question to some Chinese in Shanghai, in Beijing, a lot of people, majority will answer no. I would say no. Because I want to from policy standpoint, my personal understanding about even 5 years ago, not so many Chinese economists, Chinese government and policy maker want to make yuan a completely convertible currency, because they think they are, these clothes, that kind of financial system worked pretty well, and they want to isolate it from potential financial crisis from other countries. They did very well, but just over the past 2 or 3 years, we saw Chinese policymakers, they changed their stance a little bit. They want to make RMB, the Chinese currency, to be a regional convertible currency first. Then maybe move to a next step. The major reason I'm thinking about that is because they think their financial base is stronger than before. They have a 3.3 trillion to prepare for some unexpected things. But if we ask, can RMB replace the dollar in 5 or 10 years? I think that can answer probably definitely far beyond I can think. You know, there are a lot of issues. I think, but I think probably some media discussion about Chinese currency become a major currency in the future too early. I think kind of exaggerated a little bit probably.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that China has a limit on outgoing foreign investments. And the thing about it is I've heard that because of this, there's a lot of that capital that isn't leaving China, instead is being invested in real estate and other things. And because of that, I've heard speculation that there's a real estate bubble in China right now. Do you actually believe that to be the case? Because I've heard of stories where there are entire ghost cities in China, where they're being built these huge cities, but there's no one really inhabiting them. So do you believe there's a real estate boom or bubble, and do you think China is actually handling it properly?
Okay, my personal understanding. First, is there a bubble in real estate market in China? My personal answer is yes. Will that bubble will get busted very soon? My answer probably will be no. The reason I think that the bubble doesn't exist is use some global or international, basically the popular standard to look at the Chinese housing market. It's badly for tier 1 cities, we call it, like Shenzhen, Beijing, and Shanghai. In the global, probably for the rent, for the housing price to rent, monthly rent, usually in the global, probably usually about 200 to 1. But in China, how much? 600 to 1. Also another in our US, I think the household income to average housing price largely about maybe 3.5 times. That means one family, their income 3 or 4 years later, they can buy a house. How much in China? Tier 1 cities, 20 to 25 times. So from all the popular standards, the housing price definitely is so expensive. Bubble definitely exists. And today the absolute housing price compared with Shanghai and Hong Kong, probably a lot of areas just comparable. But the income for Shanghai population is much lower than Hong Kong. So the bubble doesn't exist. That's the reason a lot of investors here, they just talk about this, like Jim Chino's big hedge fund manager. But the key question is, even there is a bubble in China housing market, will that bubble will get busted very soon? Like a Japanese style or even our US style in 2007, 2008? Largely, probably I want to say no. The two reasons. Number one reason, because the Chinese, the housing market is different from here. Like US here, we know when really the housing market get busted in 7 or 8 days because very loose housing purchase standard. The mortgage down payment can be as low as 5%. In fact, how much in China today? Tier 1 cities, if you buy your first house, first apartment, down payment 30%. If you want to buy your second one, 70%. You want to buy your number 3 apartment, I want to say about maybe 4 months ago, they said 100%. Today in Shanghai, Beijing, no, you cannot buy the number 3 apartment. You cannot buy them. That means, okay, the bubble is there because their mortgage rate, the mortgage rate not so big here at the US. Even the bubble will will change the situation, but we will not pass it so quickly at here. The second reason is this. Still need to look at the long-range macro picture about the Chinese housing market. One reason because over the past 15 years, the Chinese housing market increased like Shanghai, my personal guess, 500% at least. One reason is so many people migrated from the rural area to the big cities. They have a huge demand for the housing. Also the demand not naturally only came from the local, also from the global. If you ask a lot of Chinese Americans here in Atlanta, probably a lot of people they bought a house in Shanghai probably. And another question in answer is, we see the bigger trend for the past 15 years. Can we continue expect the trend in the next 10 or 15 years? And the research from Goldman Sachs and Merrill largely see yes. Recently, Morgan Stanley have a research about the Chinese housing market. They think over the next 20 years, there will be around 310 million people continue move from the rural area to the cities. Will continue to support demand. So my key point is definitely bubble there, but we will see that kind of bubble be corrected gradually. But probably we will not see a dramatic bubble bust that we saw here 3 years ago and Japan 20 years ago.
Where did you hear that there were big ghost cities?
There was actually an article online where they showed that they had an album of pictures where it's just these huge developments, housing developments, completely empty. And there's like thousands and thousands of these. And the thing is, like, people are crediting this with kind of like a lot of investments being diverted to real estate because, like, if there's a limit on foreign investment, a lot of people see real estate as new investment because prices always seem to rise. So there's a lot of people investing in real estate, so you've seen these huge, like, I forget where it was specifically. This huge, like, high-rise apartments and everything. It's completely barren and very which makes me wonder, like, if maybe there's a little overinvestment in real estate in certain areas, and that's caused, and that might be a sign of some issues or problems in terms of real estate. Something I've been about.
That is a very good example. I think you are talking about a new city in Inner Mongolia province in the desert. I want to see. I reported my mathematical, our well-known mathematical. That's correct. I think that probably exists, but largely, I think that probably some kind of policy error, policy mistake for that kind of new city. And we did a long story because I think the local government tried to develop some kind of mining industry in the area. They created a city, but it turned out that kind of a policy decision was a mistake.
That's probably also a problem in nations and put into massive buildings and then bringing them in infrastructure. Who knows what it's going to be.
I've also heard foundation support, so the entire apartment building fall on their side.
All right. I guess we are out of time for more questions. Thank you all for our panelists for this great panel, and thank you for our moderators. Let's give them a round of applause. And also thank you everyone for coming to this China Business Summit. I hope you all enjoyed it and have some valuable takeaway. Thank you and good afternoon. Have a good day.